Alrighty, welcome in. This is part 2 with Shane, pain specialist out of Australia. And we're going to be doing something really practical today. So we also have my wife Megan with us. And Megan has a torn labrum in her hip. So has been having a lot of pain, obviously, in her hip and then carrying it up into her back and things like that. So we're going to do something a little practical. Not 100% sure how we're going to pull off. I think we'll be able to do it. But Shane is going to run an eval like he normally would and then kind of start to think through what would be some of the things that he would do. And again, if you haven't listened to part 1 with Shane, that's kind of high level what we're talking about here and space for the joints and all of that sort of thing. So go listen to that one. And then this is going to be kind of the practical execution on that. So appreciate you coming on again, Shane.
Mate, my pleasure. All right, let's get into it. So ordinarily at this point, I would have spoken to Megan a little bit more to find out exactly what's going on, but this is actually the first time I'm speaking to me.
About that.
Oh, okay. I also don't normally get in the middle of husband and wives, fighting and stuff. So that's an 0 for 2 to start. But no. So I obviously just going to run through and ask a few questions first, to get sort of directed to towards what we're even going to assess. So to start with, what's going on?
Oh.
So let me rephrase the question, mate, but give you a little bit more direction with what's going on, because I don't want to hear about the relationship, I suppose. That's for another call.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which avenue
where do you hurt?
Where do I hurt? Not emotionally, we're talking physically.
No, not in your heart, not in your heart or your head.
Wanted to clarify.
But yeah, from a physical, I am a physical pain expert. However, I'm currently learning about I'm going down the whole path of neuroscience and how our brain affects our pain, and probably more importantly than how it affects our pain, how it keeps us in pain when we have been in pain for a long time. And it will do everything it can to stop us from actually doing something about it, because it wants to keep feeling the pain that it thinks is normal. That's a whole other aspect.
That's another podcast.
Okay.
That's actually a whole other series of podcasts. So let's just get to the physical one.
Was that a shameless plug? Okay, so I'm gonna answer your question. I'm so sorry. This is me, by the way. I don't really I don't answer questions very well. Okay, so I've been answering what question? Where does it hurt? So this is like an injury. It's been over a year old, and it's kind of like evolved over time. And so to start, it was just, should I be standing? Like, does showing you help at all?
Sure.
So to start, it was like mainly here. And I went for a run.
Side of your hip.
The side of my hip in September of 2023. And it was just like something that started to be painful from after that point. And usually when I go for a run, like my joints don't love me, but the pain just kind of dissipates. This was the first time where it just would not let up. And then, so it's always been like almost like deep in my hip. Like it feels like it's not like a bruise. It feels like there's an inside really deep in the hip issue. And then over time, it became SI joint. So like my low back was greatly impacted. And then in June of last year, this previous summer, I kicked a ball, like I would argue, not very hard. My students and I were playing kickball, and they're 6th graders. And now I'm a little competitive. So I kicked it with maybe more strength than I should have. But as soon as I kicked it, I mean, I felt something almost like pop, or like something happened, and I went down, and I like couldn't walk. I had to be driven to our closest sports medicine down the road, and they labeled it as, and I explained to them, like, I've been having SI stuff, and they said, well, you just strained your hip flexor. And so that was labeled a hip flexor strain. And this was after they were already telling me that I was having SI issues. And so I had gotten a steroid injection in my SI joint. Nobody's ever said hip. I had gone to the orthopedic doctor to start, because I always thought it was my hip. I was like, I'm pointing to my hip. How is this my back? And he transferred me over to physiatry. He was like, it's not your hip. I'm doing your mobility tests, everything, that your x-ray of your hip joints look great. It's not your hip. So I think it's a back issue. And anyway, so after the kickball incident is when I started PT at a new place in Hampton. And she was the only person who had ever brought up any issue with potentially it being the labrum. And she was like, have they done a hip MRI? And I said, no, nobody's, even talked about my hip. And so I went back in to the same orthopedic surgeon. He did the same testing and was like, okay, like now it's your hip. And got an MRI, and it showed a torn labrum. And that's kind of the most recent. But it's like the pain has evolved though over time, because it's always been here. So they gave me my SI joint injection and they said, how's your pain? And I said, well, my SI feels fine, but my hip pain never went away. And they didn't seem to really care too much about that. And then it's transferred to my groin here, and it starts to pinch. And like when I'm sitting is really painful. And then, or like if my legs open a certain way, like if I'm doing glute stretches or something. And then if I'm standing, because I'm a photographer, throughout the day, it gets so bad in my mid back and my upper back that I can't physically stand upright. And then driving home after like an 8-hour wedding is it's like excruciating. Like it's very difficult. And honestly, at this point, it just feels like like everything is off now. Like my right knee is bad. My left hip feels like it's going, like everything.
Okay. So just to clarify, with the hip, the labrum tear, do you know where in the labrum it was torn?
Yep, it's at the 1 to 2 o'clock.
So that's around where you were actually feeling the pain as well?
Yeah, so
that does line up with
about
about there.
Like here.
Yeah.
But the pinching lately has been more like inside. What would the 1 to 2 o'clock would be? I'm like thinking of myself as a clock now over here, right? So I guess, yeah.
Okay. So just to clarify, being competitive is fine, but feeling the need to kick a ball further than 6-year-olds or grade sixes is maybe a tad too going a tad too far. Yeah. With that said, you should have a body that allows you to kick it. You should have a body that allows you to kick a soccer ball as hard as you want.
It's a kickball. Yeah, I agree.
A kickball. What's a kickball?
It's
American.
It's a ball, but you're playing kickball, so you kick the ball. It makes sense to us.
Is it not like soccer?
It is. Literally,
the point of the game is, can you kick the ball far?
It's just like kick the ball. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a little bouncier than a kickball. It's
baseball, but with kicking a ball instead of throwing a ball.
Yeah, look, my whole thing, just really quickly, is like a couple of weeks ago, I actually put a video up on Instagram for this, just because for me it was really cool. Like I was on the GHD, I was experimenting with some weird exercises I do, and I can't imagine what goes through people's heads when they see me train at the gym. But so I'm standing on this, GHD, it was, I don't know, like 5 foot in the air or something like that, and I'd finished my exercise, and then I stood on it because whatever, and I'm like, I'm just going to jump off. kind of see if I can. And I'm 45 and I jumped as high as I could off this probably maybe 4 foot thing and then landed in a really deep squat and everything felt great. And the point is,
Oh.
my whole thing is that I just want to be able to just do what I want to do forever. Like I don't want to feel like, oh, I'm 40, so I shouldn't kick a ball hard. Like, come on. Why do I have to stop living just because I hit some magic age? So
Mhm.
that's my whole thing. I want to kick ass when I'm 90. That's the goal. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of little tests. As we talked about on the podcast, part one, I suppose, one of the things I'm always going to look at is I want to make sure that your joints have enough space in them. And by that I mean, you've got your hip, so your femur is in your hip joint. And we've got a ball and socket joint there. Like if you have limited space in that joint, what's going to happen is as you go to move your femur, the femur is going to rub on the bone in the hip itself. The body knows that, and it knows it's a really big problem because if you just have bone rubbing on bone, you're going to have big issues. So the body just contracts everything to stop that movement. So what we need to do before anything else is we need to make sure you actually have a properly functioning hip, which means you need to have enough space in your hip to do that. And the way we see how much space you've got in your hip is we test how much rotation you have of your hip. So this is where we're going to do our first little assessment. And all we're going to do, I'm going to move the camera back perfectly. All we're going to do, we're going to sit down so that your thigh, your quad, your femur is is horizontal. Your body's upright, so you've got about a 90-degree angle in your hip. And we're going to start with what's called internal rotation, which is so the leg has to stay perfectly still. And then we're going to rotate the femur in, which means the foot will go outwards. And I want to see how far you can rotate your leg that way. Now, what I'm going to tell you is this is going to be almost impossible for you to do without other parts of your body moving. Even though you consciously tell your body, don't move anything else, this is me cheating, right? So this is me not moving my femur at all. I've just lifted my hip a bit. Another way you're going to cheat is as you rotate out, your knee will drop down because as you drop down, it'll create this illusion of rotation. Because your body, your nervous system, your subconscious is just trying to help you get your foot out further, whereas that's not the goal. So I've just given you a couple of examples of the most common ways people are going to cheat. Let's see how you go. Or are you doing it
Give an
already?
example for me again. So, you see, okay?
You see your
Okay.
Shane?
Can I? Yeah, it's just quite blurry. That's all. And I know that I believe Riverside that we're using is going to make this super clear in HD once it's recorded. Can I ask you there, how is your knee in line with your hip? I.e., is your quad or your femur horizontal? Yeah, there. Keep it up there.
Here?
If you can, without, by the way, this isn't
Yep.
supposed to hurt.
Yeah.
All right,
no,
now
it's
go nice and slow.
That's it.
That's it. And is your knee at 90 degrees there?
Yeah.
Okay, go again.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, super limited. What I want to do is I just want to test that. So this is your what's called your active range of motion. I just want to test that passively. So what I'm going to get you to do, Jeff, is just get to the side, and as we get to the end of that active range, just relax and get Jeff. If you just put one hand on the knee there and one hand on the ankle, and just get into a stretch that way. Don't force it. Just see until you get to sort of the end of the range. I just want to see the difference between the two. Okay. Okay. And so you can let go. And then Megan, if you just do it one more time for me without Jeff's help. Yeah, okay. So now what I'm going to get you to do is we're going to rotate the other way. So the only thing with the other way is you just want to make sure that that leg's out of the way. So I'll do it with this leg. So there's two ways. One is you can just kind of walk that leg out to the side, but that can be a bit tricky depending on your chair. Or you can just bend the knee on the other leg, and that way the shin is sort of out of the way, and then rotate this way. Okay, that's okay. Okay, so now what I want to know is when you rotated in the first one, how did that feel when you got to the end? Not
When
good.
Jeff rotated, it actually wasn't horrible. And I think that might have been because I might have been cheating a little when he started to. But when I'm doing it by myself, it's not great. And it's like
Can
here.
you can you explain not great? Was it the same normal pain and sensation that you get, or was it something slightly different?
It's not my SI as much as it's like a pinch. It's like a pinching.
So it's a pinching, it's definitely not like a muscle cramping.
No, it's not really like a. I mean, it's like here is more of the crampy, but here feels
Hmm.
like a pinch.
So the groin is more crampy. The hip is more of the pinch.
Okay. Um,
I
so
mean,
there's a
I guess like it makes me feel like I need to stretch my body straight after I do that.
makes you feel like you need to stretch.
Well, like yeah, well, but that's how I always feel with this. I feel like I feel like I'm constantly trying to find like some way to like relieve the pain, like so to like manipulate my body, but whenever I'm sitting down or like this for a long time, I feel like I constantly just want to stretch out because it feels so.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that are happening there, and I wouldn't ordinarily just stop at this point and sort of explain what's happening. I'd normally go on to a few other things, which we will get to. But for the interest of the fact that people are either listening or watching this, one interesting finding there was one is you don't have very far. So for people that are watching, if she's internally rotating, she's probably had about 10 degrees. But then when Jeff did a passive stretch, we got to probably 40 to 45 degrees. As a rule of thumb, that only wants to be 10 to 15 degrees. You don't want too big a gap, because we need a little bit of a gap between where we can actively get to and where we can passively get to, just for but when that space is too big, when that gap is too big, what that actually means is our limb can get into a range of motion that we have no control over. That is
Is that
potentially very dangerous.
is that tied to hypermobility?
That's technically hypermobility, yeah.
So that's what my PT has recently discovered is saying that I'm like almost my joints are like on the other end of the spectrum, which she said is actually not ideal. So that you bring that up that is matching what we've discovered recently.
Yeah, funny thing about this too is that almost no health practitioner will ever check for it.
Huh.
And I I don't think that very many people have hypermobility. However, I've probably found over the last 6 months, I'd say 80% of my clients have had either not necessarily hypermobility, but they've had hypermobility in specific joints. So hypermobility
Mm-hmm.
is more of a systemic thing, but for a lot of people, you can create hypermobility just by overstretching. And I would say, yeah, probably about 80% of my clients have had hypermobility. And this is just purely conjecture on my behalf. But I work with people that have had pain for years. Like people aren't coming to me as a first off, you're like, oh, I've hurt my hip, I'm going to go see Shane. Like I speak to people that have been in pain for years. They've seen PTs, chiros, physios, surgeons, doctors, and haven't had any results.
Mhm.
So my conjecture is that one of the reasons a lot of these people aren't getting help is because this is never checked for. And if this is the problem and they never check it, then obviously their problem doesn't exist, which is why I have this running thing with hating bird dogs. Bird dogs as an exercise is great. But when they're the cure-all for everything, and when we're not testing for other things, it becomes a problem because it's kind of like a crutch that medical professionals sort of lean on. Anyway, I go off on tangents. So I apologize. So that's one thing that you need to 100% need to close, simply because you've got this range of motion that your body knows is unsafe. So what your body does to protect you from that is just before you get to that range, which is not a long way, like that 10 degrees of internal rotation, you're doing that every time you get in a car, every time you sit down,
Mhm.
every time you go to the bathroom, every time you get in and out of bed, every time you put your shoes on, like that's happening. So at all of these times, you're getting to the edge of where your body feels safe. And the only thing your body can do to protect you from going into that range of danger, as Ashley likes to call it, your body just contracts your muscles to stop you going into this range. Because if you think about, like, our body has an automatic reaction, where, let's say you're having a conversation with someone. I'm trying to explain this in a way that people that are listening only can see it or can picture it. Imagine you're having a conversation with someone, your arms are out wide because you're kind of getting excited and gesticulating everywhere, and then someone runs past and sort of hits your arm. What will happen is all of the muscles on the front of your shoulder, so your pecs, your shoulder, your bicep, everything will just instantly contract, and to make sure your arm doesn't dislocate. That's a natural thing for our body to have to be able to do. So if that was happening and my arm was out wide, but I was in a range of motion where my body couldn't actually control the tissue there, and someone ran past and hit my arm, I would either dislocate my shoulder or tear tissue because the body didn't have the ability to contract. So it can be potentially super dangerous, which is why
Well,
this exists.
how I dislocated my knee
Yeah.
Yeah. So
of this exact same
Yeah.
leg.
yeah. So that's yeah. So yeah, hypermobility.
All
That's
parking
a thing,
lot,
and
because
so
I
it's an
know you want to
interesting
finish.
thing, right? So what have you been told? What have you been told or given to work on it?
Well, so I was going to say I can parking lot my question because I know you want to finish the assessment, but my
Yep.
question for you was probably going to be like, and my PT is basically just said, and she's great, and she's just said like, hey, you need to strengthen your core is a big one. Oh, his hands are over his face like he's upset.
Yeah.
And strengthen like my quads, like strengthen, I guess, is just what then the answer has been. Strengthen your
Okay.
muscles
So
and
strengthen your core. Please don't tell me you're doing bird dogs.
I don't even know what a bird dog is.
Cool. Okay.
Oh,
It's like a
yeah,
plank.
I've
It's
done
like,
those.
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's like a stereotypical PT would give you a bird dog to strengthen your core.
No, she has me do planks.
Yeah, that was. So, usually I'll say bird dogs or planks
Okay, then yeah,
as opposed to just bird dogs. But
Okay.
okay, so a couple of things. God damn it.
The situation. Sorry, this is just fun to watch for me.
Well, for people that are just listening to this, whatever minute we are in this podcast, go to YouTube and watch my face.
Yeah, minute 24.
I am not, mate. I am not. This isn't me pretending.
Yeah.
This is me telling myself to be nice in my own head. I'm having a conversation
Your whole
continually
body's
here.
contracting right now. Like your whole body is holding in what you want to say that you're just not going to. I can see it.
Yes,
You're like
this is.
self-soothing.
Oh my Lord. I couldn't get into a smaller ball if I tried. Actually, I could because I do jiu-jitsu, so I actually can. Okay, so that's one thing that while we're here though, what I want to see is we're going to move on to doing a cat cow. But before I do that, I just want to test one thing. We're going to get back into that external rotation, and we're going to do two things. So one is we're going to externally rotate, get your active range, and then do this to get your passive range, which Jeff is going to help with. And then we're going to do a second exercise with that, but we'll do this first. So once again, just try to make sure, by the way the body will cheat here is it'll think you want more range. So it'll kind of lift your leg up and out a little bit. So just try to make sure that, imagine your femur is it's like a skewer here and you're just rotating on a rotisserie.
Okay.
All right, let's go.
That's mine.
Cool. Yep. So you just relax now and see what Jeff can do for you.
Cool. Yep, probably there.
I'll do. Yeah. So normally when I do this,
oh Lord.
Normally when I do this, I will explain that you have to communicate a lot with Jeff while he's doing that, because we have a natural aversion to that movement. Like my subconscious knows that's not right, or Jeff's subconscious knows that's not right. Like, when you see people do like these hypermobile, like they bend their thumbs back to their wrists.
Yeah.
We all do that weird kind of, like, our body knows that's not right.
That make you ew?
So while you're doing this, Jeff's kind of scared. He doesn't know, because people that don't have this hypermobility, we don't understand what this feels like. We think,
I did give him.
So it's literally a constant communication of, I'm all right, I'm okay, keep going. It's starting to get tight, but also we don't want him to go too far. So it's just a constant communication process. But we've seen enough there for this purposes anyway, because I know that you had.
You're about to bend me again. Right.
Yeah, you had about 45 degrees roughly actively. You got up to about 80 degrees when we stopped. So once again, it's above that 10 to 15 degree range that we want to have. But I want to do one more thing. So I want to test. I just want to see how this feels for you. I want you to get into that active range. So you're going to externally get into that external range. What I then want is, probably for the purpose of this, I do want Jeff just to hold your leg still. And then I want you to do this. So before you get into position, Megan, what I want you to do, once he's holding it still, is I want you to try to rotate your leg back down. But Jeff's not going to let it move.
He's pushing. So
obviously you're not going to try very hard. You're going to get up to maybe 20, 30, 40% effort. So this will be isometrically training all of the connective tissue in your hip.
So I'm going to be at an upward angle, and I want to try to put it back.
And Jeff's going to hold still, and you're going to effectively try to rotate back to that neutral position. So just gently start at about sort of 10%, gradually ramp up to about 20, up to 30, and just hold that. How does that feel? Jeff, can you hold her leg still?
Yeah,
do you need to train? Do you need to train a bit more, mate?
I need to get stronger, apparently, Shane. All right, I'll try again. Here we go. All right. Yeah.
Okay.
This is not 20%.
Okay, no, we'll reset. We'll reset.
That was the competitive thing that broke her in the kickball. She's like, I'm gonna move his dang hand.
Okay.
That was like,
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to
90%.
set this up a little bit differently because Jeff obviously needs to do more bicep curls.
I
So,
clearly do.
Thank you.
so what we're going to do
Lots of
is you're
beats.
going to use your leg this time instead of Jeff's arm. So you'll get into, so straighten your other leg. Get that leg over the top.
Replaced by my
So
leg.
your right leg over the top, get into that external rotation and just rest it on your own leg.
Okay.
Now, notice how though that your left knee and femur has sort of popped up and out to the side. So get it back down
Yeah.
to that sort of neutral position. And now do exactly what you just started doing then. But really, really seriously, gradually ramp it up just because we're going to get up to about a 60 to 70% effort. But it's important that we don't go too hard because you do have the potential to hurt yourself because you're using your labrum tissue here. If you have tears there, you may damage them. You may hurt yourself. I'm telling you, you won't, but only because we're going to gradually ramp up to make sure it doesn't hurt. So what's going to happen is I'm going to talk you up. We're going to go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, around to 60, 70%. But if we get to 30% and it starts to hurt, then we back off a little bit. So we're going to get to 60, 70%, or when it starts to hurt, whichever one comes first. It may be either. We'll see as we go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm pushing down on my knee.
Yeah. So here, this one, you're just holding it still.
Okay.
That's just because otherwise, as I push my leg in, my knee will just come up. So this
Okay.
is just to hold it still. Okay. So,
Okay.
so just really lightly, just 10%. 10% is you can kind of feel some tissue working, but not a huge amount. So gradually ramp up from 10 to 20, up to 30, up to 40, up to 50, and think you're trying to rotate your leg, not drive the knee to the floor. You're rotating the leg up to 50, up to sort of 60%, and then hold that. You might even try to mentally envisage your glutes trying to sort of rotate your leg around. It's going to hold that for about another 10 or 20 seconds. How does that feel? Crampy is perfect. Perfect answer. And now just relax and slowly come out. Okay, so in this case, cramping is perfect. Cramping is for two reasons. One is it's literally your tissue trying to figure out how to contract there. Because you've taken your leg past your active range. You're now in your passive range and you're asking the tissue to work in your passive range, which means it can't work there. So it's literally trying to figure it out. As well as that, you will have access to that tissue, but you never use it there. So some of that tissue will actually work, but it will be like absolutely weak as piss because you literally never use it. So you can imagine how weak a muscle is if you've never used it, or at least not for probably 5 years. And I don't know why I said 5, but a period of time. So that's cramping is good. Cramping is perfect. Cramping means you're actually using the tissue that we want to use. So that's perfect. So now I just want to have a look. This obviously isn't a full assessment, but I want to look at a cat cow. Have you done a cat cow or a cat camel before? Okay, so what we're going to do is what's called a segmental cat cow. Adjust the camera a little bit. We should be fine. And all a segmental cat cow is a cat cow, but we're trying to move sort of one vertebrae at a time. So I'll show you what I mean. Ordinarily, when we do a cat cow or a cat camel, we just think get into flexion, get into extension. We sort of move the whole body at the same time. Even if we try to sort of wave from the bottom to the top, what we usually do is we'll use our larger core muscles. So for anyone, listening or if you can imagine, I don't know if you ever see a bodybuilder or someone, you can see sort of these large sort of muscles running up and down the side of the spine. Those are the muscles that people will probably normally use when we do this. But there's a lot of deeper muscle, deeper tissue that actually controls your spine. So specifically, we'll talk about the multifidi. There's a bunch of little muscles that run up and down your spine that are attached and control your individual vertebrae. You can't see them because they're deeper with the spine. That's what we're trying to use to drive this movement, because normally when people would do a cat-cow, those other larger muscles do the movement and the spine just goes for the ride. So I'll show you really quickly. We'll start so I'll get into as much flexion as you can, and then start at the hips. So you tilt the hips and then just really slowly just getting into extension, moving from the base of your spine up one vertebrae at a time while actively holding the rest of your spine in flexion until you get to said vertebrae. So I'm about, I don't know what, halfway. I'll speed this up for the sake of me. And then once we're here, go back the other way. So once again, tilt the hips, still start at the hips, and then just try to get one vertebrae at a time. I will speed this up. Boom. And that's what I want you to do. So I'm going to watch, but also at the end, I'm going to ask you how it felt. What I mean by how it felt is, were there certain parts of your spine where you could consciously, actively feel your individual vertebrae? Or were there certain parts of your spine that just kind of felt like a black hole and you couldn't really tell what was going on, you couldn't feel them? Those are the kind of sensations I'm going to ask you about. So as you're doing it, just sort of pay attention to that type of thing. Okay, so once again, like everything we do, this is not supposed to hurt. So if you get to so much flexion that it hurts for whatever reason, then back off. You shouldn't, but let's just see how you go. So let's start in as much flexion as you can get. Try to flex your lumbar spine a bit more for me. You've got a huge amount of flexion happening in your thoracic, your upper spine. So try to get a little bit more in your lower. Yeah, there we go. Beauty. All right. And let's go. So tilt the hips and just start at the bottom and just one vertebrae at a time. Okay, so I want that to take about 3 times as much time as it did. Stay in that extension, and then no, you can stay there. We're just going to go back the other way. Sustain extension. So now we're going to go to flexion. So tilt the hips. You want to go back and try that one again? Okay, but just before you try again, I'm going to tell you what you just did. You know what? I'm going to show you what you just did, and I'll talk you through what you just did. So for the people that are listening, so I said start at the hip and go one vertebrae at a time, which is this. I'm speeding this up. I don't want you to go this fast. What you did was this. Literally, your head moved at the same time as your hips.
So try again.
Yeah, well, look, look, you're right. It's not great. It's actually bad. But the worst thing about that is that's actually super common. Like this is not good, but it is common.
Yeah, well, when they say cat cow, you watch them just go woo woo.
Yeah. All right, so let's try that one again. Now that you've got that direction, try it again. Slow it down, and try to feel your spine. Yeah. And once you get to there, I'm going to get you to go back the other way again for me, but way slower than you did the first time. So start with the hips. Yeah, so notice that's kind of the whole bottom 2/3 of the spine moving all at once. Kind of talking to Jeff here. Yeah, and then and in the thoracic, there's pretty much there's no extension. She actually got all right at it the second time around. Okay, we're done with this.
Can't watch it anymore. I'm enjoying watching it. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh no!
Is it really
No.
bad?
No.
Oh,
There's
no, it's
not.
fine.
There's no such thing as good or bad with this. It's a
Oh,
matter of me seeing how your body moves, how it works to see what's wrong, right? Like, I
oh,
mean, if you you know, you wouldn't be talking to me if there wasn't a problem, right? So it's not that it's bad. I just need to know what's going on. However,
yes.
before I give you my feedback, which I kind of already have, how did it feel?
So uh, when I went from extension when my head's facing the sky.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So when I went from extension to a curl, it was more noticeably uncomfortable than when I went back into my extension.
Okay, but in relation to feeling your individual vertebrae,
The low.
let me even ask it in a different way. Does the phrase feeling your individual vertebrae even actually make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense of like trying to feel each part of my spine as it's moving, right? So like,
Yeah, even more so, trying to feel your individual vertebrae being the things that are creating the movement.
so like I couldn't really feel. It felt like everything was moving at the same in like
It was.
like my low back was moving at the same time and my
Yeah.
upper back was moving at the same. Does that
Because
make
look,
sense?
think about it like this. The difference between feeling it move and feeling it control the movement is this. So if I hold my arm out straight and I contract my bicep to bend or to flex my elbow, that's me using my bicep. But if I get my other hand to grab my wrist and move my elbow, that's my bicep. That's my elbow moving. The other one
Mm-hmm.
is my bicep moving my elbow. That's the
Mm-hmm.
difference between your spine just moving or your spine doing the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Because you will have movement, but what muscles are doing it? And I can guarantee you right now, were not the multifidi that control your spine. They were your other larger or other core muscles that do the movement, and then your spine kind of just is a passenger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's a bunch of stuff going on, and this is why I hate planks and bird dogs. Um, Planks and bird dogs are great. They really are. But like every single other exercise, like, some people say deadlifts are dangerous. So there's no such thing as a bad exercise. There's just, are they the right one for you to do for what you're trying to get out of this thing? Um, One of the things is, I think I touched on this in the last podcast, but all of our tissue have mechanoreceptors in them, which is basically a communication module that is effectively just talking to the nervous system continuously, telling the nervous system what it's doing. So if you could imagine every single tissue, which is your muscle, your effectively your skin, your connective tissue, your labrums, like everything is just constantly updating your brain. Let's say brain in this case, it's not quite accurate, but let's say it's updating your brain with what it's moving, which is how, like, when I close my eyes and move my arm, I know what my arm is doing because all of that tissue is continually uploading information. So imagine there's a map of your body in your brain and it's got all these little lights on it, and all those little lights, which are creating the map, are being lit up, let's say, by all this tissue. Well, like everything else in our body, everything, if you don't use it for long enough, you lose it. So you've got a ton of muscles, or a bunch of muscles that run up and down your spine, called the multifidi. They control your individual vertebrae. They're muscles. They have little mechanoreceptors. They tell your brain or your spine or your nervous system what the spine is doing. But when you do planks, when you do bird dogs, when you actively stay upright and brace your core, you don't use them because you're using all the other muscles, the bigger core muscles. Now, one of the things your body is the best at is conserving energy. Like its number one job is survival, period. One of the ways it does that is through energy conservation. So it's not just going to use muscles it doesn't need to. So as I'm bracing my core, I'm using my abs and my obliques and my lats and all these QLs. Those muscles just don't work. So over time, they stop sending a signal. And then one day, your brain or your nervous system or your whatever realizes it does not know what your spine is doing. Usually, that's actually a big factor in back pain because your body realizes it doesn't know what your spine is doing. So it does the only thing it can do, which is protect your spine just in case. So it contracts all the tissue around that area, and that is the pain. So this is sort of potential things in the future. It's not what's going on with you. However, all tissue also requires nutrients to repair. Now, the way tissue gets nutrients is you use the tissue. The tissue itself generates force. So you contract it or you use it, and it effectively just pulls in nutrients, which is what the pump is. If anyone goes to the gym, you do a bunch of bicep curls, you get a bigger bicep. It's just as you're doing this exercise, that muscle is sucking in blood, that blood creates the pump, the blood brings in nutrients. So effectively, if you don't use tissue, it doesn't get the required nutrients for repair. So, and all tissue is being damaged all the time through oxidative stress. It just constantly needs it. So being able to use your spine actively, not just passively by your other core muscles doing it, is absolutely paramount in relation to fixing back pain. But it's also absolutely paramount with making sure we age without pain and we age being able to continue to do the things that we want to do. And one of the things with hypermobility, and one of the reasons why a lot of people with hypermobility actually have tight or sore lower backs is that there's like, for people that are watching this, I'm sitting down on the floor kind of cross-legged. A lot of people with hypermobility will sit like this. They'll cross their legs even more because it feels good because they're getting a stretch. But whilst that does alleviate symptoms, you're making the problem worse. Because if your problem by definition is hypermobility, which it shouldn't be, it should be called hyperflexibility because mobility means you can control the range. But the problem is hypermobility. Maybe becoming more of it isn't the solution. Like, call me crazy, but what happens is the symptom of the fact that we have too much flexibility in relation to the control, the symptom to that is the body creates tightness to protect you from this range, which therefore we naturally want to go and stretch because that stretching alleviates the tightness. But we're literally not allowing our body to do the thing it knows it has to do to protect you. So what's going to happen over time is the body will just start holding on tighter and tighter and tighter. And you're creating this, you're making this gap larger and larger and larger because what you're not doing is getting a more active range of motion, but you are getting more passive range of motion through all the stretching. So you're literally exacerbating your problem. But then, so I'm sitting here, once again, cross-legged. I'm in this external rotation. I'm in a fair bit of hip flexion. And my body wants to contract around my hip to get my hip safe. Well, the muscles that do that aren't just like my hip flexor. It's my hip flexor, my quad, my hamstrings, my ITB, all of my lower back muscles, my glutes, the adductors, like all those muscles that are always tight for all of these people are actually just holding your hip in safe positions. And then over time, once again, that lower back just starts getting really stiff and really sore because it's just constantly tight. So it's not moving. It's not working. It's not moving. You're not moving it around. And like at the end of the day, if you don't move a joint for a long enough period of time, it's going to hurt. So yeah, so there's a few things going on with you. We didn't do obviously a full assessment here, but what you need to do as a hypermobile person is not get strong. Yes, being strong is good. 100%. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't get strong. Being strong is good. But if the problem is you have too big a gap between your active and passive range of motion, the solution is pretty black and white. Close that gap and get a larger active range of motion. Because when you now close that gap and you get down to that 10 or 15 degrees, all of the tightness literally goes away. It's not there anymore because your body doesn't have to protect you anymore. Simple. The problem with the bird dogs and the planks and these things is I just showed you that you literally can't feel or control your individual vertebrae. You can't control your spine. You literally have muscles there that you can't use. By doing planks, once again, planks are great. I'm not saying don't do them, but if that's all you're doing, then you're literally teaching your body not to use those muscles that you already can't use. Is it making it worse? No. However, if we think that's what's going to work, it's going to stop us doing the things that are going to work, and therefore it's going to make it worse. Hopefully that makes sense. So I've had a couple of people over the last couple of days tell me that, why do you hate bird dogs and planks so much, which is why I'm probably talking about this a little bit more. I don't hate them. What I hate is that so many PTs and physios think that they will fix everything. And because they truly think that, they're not then forced to go and figure out what will work. And that to me is the biggest problem. And the other thing is they do work most of the time. Because like 90% of the time when someone goes to see a PT or a physio with back pain, there's actually nothing wrong. The nervous system just thought there was a potential danger, maybe, so it just contracted some tissue around the potentially dangerous spot to protect us just in case. And then over the course of the next, say, 4 to 6 weeks, as long as we sort of don't aggravate it and just move a bit, the pain goes away. But because they go to the PT or the physio, and the PT or physio gives them glute bridges, clamshells, bird dogs, planks, dead bugs, maybe a couple of other exercises. Put a ball on a wall and push your leg onto the ball while you do a little bit of a squat. Like they do that, and 90% of the time it works because there was no problem. I could have tapped you on the head and called you Shirley and you would have got better. But because it works so often, because there wasn't a problem, they then think this is what's actually fixing it. So then when the 10% of people come along that's not the problem, they actually do have a problem, they don't get fixed. Once again,
so Shane,
yeah.
with that example, right? So I think that's a good thought, and I don't know what your time crunch is here, but with that being the situation, right? Somebody like Megan who has a problem, which is the gap between the active and the passive range of motion, and or maybe it's the torn labrum or what, all of these kinds of things, not being able to use those things. What's kind of, how do we close that gap, I guess, that's I think the question for everybody listening.
Yeah.
And for Megan, it's like, hey, if I have that gap, what do I need to do to close it?
Just quickly before we get to that, one thing I will point out with hypermobility, like I said, some people are born with it. it can get really, really bad. It can affect your circulation, your blood, your everything, because it's a connective tissue disorder. And connective tissue is in everything, like your blood vessels, your arteries, your veins, like everything. So this can be a really, really traumatic thing for people. And unfortunately for a lot of people, and I do want to point this out because it is really, really important for some people, is that they're continually tight, and stretching fixes them, or I shouldn't say fix them, alleviates the pain for a short time. So they start doing yoga, and then they do hot yoga, or like whatever, they do yoga. But then they start doing yoga 5 days a week, 7 days a week, 10 days a week. Because every time they do yoga, they feel better. But continue gradually over time, they actually start getting worse and worse and worse. And they get into excruciating pain levels. And they go back to yoga every day because that is what they truly believe is obviously helping them. Because it's a natural thing to think, I'm tight, therefore I'm going to stretch and it's going to fix me. But rather than that, we just need to go one level deeper and say, why are we tight? And I just want to point this out because a lot of people are making their situation a lot worse. And a lot of people that are doing yoga that much, that's one of the reasons they did it in the first place, and they're actually exacerbating the problem. Once again, I'm not knocking yoga. I love yoga. Yoga is great. But once again, it's just kind of like, what are you doing it for type scenario. I just wanted to point that out in case there's anyone listening, because if that's you, if that's the cycle, you're tight, you go to yoga, you feel better, but then the next day you're tight again, and maybe it's getting worse, but you're getting better at yoga and you're frustrated because you don't know what's going on. Are you doing it wrong? No, you're just doing the wrong thing. You're doing what is understandable, which is you're tight, therefore you stretch. But you could be making this worse, and there's ways to fix it. Okay, so one more thing just in the hypermobility really quickly is we just tested two things, your internal and external rotation. One thing with hypermobility is everyone's going to be a little bit different. Some people might be hypermobile like one direction and then not the other. They might have hypermobility in flexion and extension and lots of other things. So a larger, more robust assessment is required because we can't just close the gap in one direction. You need to close the gap everywhere. And then once that's done, there's no more tightness. So you need to probably do realistically three sort of things to start with, or three focuses to start with. One is closing your passive to active gap. We use exercises that are called positional isometrics for that. Normally I'm writing down as I go here. So Jeff, I'm gonna ask you to try and remember and put a pin in this as we go, so I can just circle back. But really quickly, you need to do positional isometrics to close your passive and active gap. You need to do specific exercises to actually gain individual control of your vertebrae. We would start that with, you would be doing segmental cat-cows, but there's an exercise called hinge point training, which would be absolutely integral there. You'd be doing a lot of hip shifts and stuff as well, because if you've got like tight sort of SIJ area, hip shifts are really, really beneficial for that. With that said, that's only really fixing the symptom until as we close the gap. So you sort of do them together. But because of the torn labrum, you also want to work on increasing your connective tissue architecture, which is basically getting more connective tissue stuff. So everyone that I work with from a hypermobility standpoint generally works with me for a period of 12 weeks. So sometimes they stay on after, sometimes they're sweet then. But either way, we would get to the connective tissue architecture after they start closing the gap in a normal circumstance. But because of the torn labrum, we would also be working on that from the beginning. The way we target that connective tissue architecture, it's effectively it's connective tissue. We're going to get it lengthened and isometrically load it for a period of 2 minutes. Pretty simple stuff. So you get into this position that I got you to test to see whether you could do it, where you had your leg on your other leg, and then you're sort of rotating backwards. So what we're doing is we're getting all the deepest sort of tissue in your joint stretched. That's why we're getting to that point here. Then as you start rotating down isometrically, because it's isometric, we're now biasing the connective tissue. Do it for a couple of minutes. You're not going to get to failure. You're going to get to fatigue, but that will obviously change as we go because progression matters with this stuff. You're actually creating more connective tissue and you're actually targeting all that tissue in the sort of deepest part of your hip. So that's one for you. Positional isometrics is an interesting exercise. How do I describe it here? So what I'll do is I'll actually just sit back up on the couch. Once again, I've never really explained how to do this stuff on a podcast before. So for anyone that's listening, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get with my left leg, or people that are watching also, I'm going to get my left leg and I'm going to get to the end of what's called my active range. And then I'm going to passively, so stretch, get another 10 or 15 degrees past my active range, and I'm going to hold still. In this case, I'll actually put my leg in that place. And at this point, I'm going to do a pales contraction and then a rails contraction. So all pales is me trying to rotate back to a neutral position, but it's not going to go anywhere because I have an immovable object in the way. Which is something Megan did. But in this case, rather than doing 60, 70%, we're actually going to get up to 100%. This is absolute max intensity for about 10 seconds. And then after that 10 seconds, you're going to reverse direction. So you're trying now to lift that leg off and go further. And you're doing that at absolute max intensity as well. And then you rest. And then you move another 10 or 15 degrees. Now, I can't do this because I don't have hypermobility. And you'll do one rep at every 10 to 15 degree increment past your active range. So as an example, if you have a 30-degree gap, you will be doing 2 reps. Get to your active range, go 10 or 15 degrees past, do a rep there, rest, move another 10 or 15, which in this case will be the end of your passive range. You just want to get to the end. You don't want to be forcing it and creating more stretch again, and then do another rep there. If you had 60 degrees, you'd be doing 4 reps. The max effort intensity is effectively communicating with the nervous system to try to get the nervous system to actually work. If you think about it, like even if you go back to squats and stuff, right, like any kind of max effort thing. So if you're doing like say a set of 12 squats, you're probably working at, I don't know, say 60, 70% of your max. You're not really doing nervous system training there. You're just making your muscles bigger. There's obviously overlap, but that's basically what we're biasing. Once you get up to that 1, 2, 3 reps, you're not making your muscles bigger. You're teaching your nervous system how to work better. So that's effectively, there's obviously a little bit more to it than that, but that's effectively what we're doing with this max effort positional isometrics. At that max effort, where it's a nervous system. So we're trying to teach the nervous system to actually get bigger ranges of motion. And as you go, you just keep going until you can now get to sort of a 10 or 15 degree gap. You now move on. You never have to do that exercise ever again. But then there's a next step after that, which is you really need to train that tissue because you now have tissue that you have access to that you haven't used maybe ever, or maybe since you were a teenager. So it's just really weak. So we then just effectively go back to that connective tissue architecture training where you're getting to that lengthened position, go for a couple of minutes. That's sort of step 1. Then we can then you can start doing eccentrics, which is kind of the same thing, just way more robust. And now you're building up the load bearing capacity of that tissue. So effectively, it's just progressive strength training for the tissue that you now have access to that you haven't used for ages. So what you're really doing is strengthening if you have hypermobility and you train to be strong, that's great. But what you're not doing is actually fixing the problem because your body still has to contract to hold you tight to not go in the dangerous range. So if you then just do these positional isometrics, you close that gap you now have no reason for your body to protect you. The tightness goes away. Now you could stop there, but I'm like my thing is like straight up is I'm snowboarding and doing jiu-jitsu when I'm 90. I don't care. That's what's happening. The feeling that you get, like trying to articulate to someone what it feels like to actually feel the inside of my joint is pretty insane. Like, Jeff, obviously you've been a trainer for a long, long time. How would you articulate to someone what it feels like to have a good mind-muscle connection and feel strong that has never been to the gym and never trained?
Don't know if I could do that, Shane.
It's kind of impossible.
Yeah.
It's like explaining someone that's colorblind what is orange. But to that same thing, man, when you feel, like I can literally feel all the tissue in my hip, in my shoulder, in my elbow. It is a crazy sensation. And the confidence that I have, how it changes my life, and this is something that I've been realizing over the last couple of weeks with this neuroplasticity and like all these different things, is everything I used to do for years, there was a part of me that was, how is this going to make me feel? Am I going to injure myself? How do I do this to not hurt myself? With all of those thoughts gone, life has become like, it's like I have a childlike quality to it again. Because when I'm playing, like what my playing is as an adult is jiu-jitsu and whatever, but sometimes it's climbing trees with kids, like not random kids in the park. I'm not that kind of weirdo, but I get to lose myself in the thing that I'm doing and just truly be present and love it. That's what I thought was happening. And it is happening. But what I've come to realize over the last couple of weeks is all of those thoughts that were literally preventing me from being able to get the same level of enjoyment out. What they were also doing is it was sort of turning my emotions down a little bit. It was turning everything a little bit down because I was being a little bit wary of everything. But when I turned the emotions down or turned my ability down to enjoy those things, it also turns down every other emotion that I have because my body and my brain and my nervous system can't distinguish the difference. I'm either turning everything down or everything up, not one or two. And this is one of the things I'm starting to realize over the last couple of weeks with this sort of deep dive into brain stuff is that it has literally changed every single other aspect of my life. And I know that's not what we were going to talk about with this podcast, but it's just something that it's just been infesting my brain the last week or two since I've been learning all this stuff. But anyway, so
well, I appreciate you sharing that, but I think I need to be a little bit mindful of time here because we obviously dug into a ton of stuff here. But
yeah.
So, but I do feel like that's. I know you could go and rip. This is how we like.
A Stein?
I don't know, but we could rip for quite a bit longer. But I do feel like what you nailed on the head here. And at the end here is the freedom that comes from being pain free, but also knowing that you're not gonna go back into that because you have that control over those places and the confidence in your strength and also range of motion and all of that kind of stuff. So, dude, I love that. I really appreciate it. And if you've listened to both of these, go connect with Shane. I'll put his contact info down in the description. Any last minute things you want to say, Shane, before I let you go? Sorry to cut you off because I know you'll go for forever, man.
Yeah. So all I want to say is, if anything that we've spoken about over the course of this podcast, which is effectively, you're tight, you're sore, you stretch, you feel better, you do this, you do that. If you've been on this cycle, there's likely something that we can do for it. We can probably fix your pain and you can probably get your freedom back and start living the life that you want. With that said, I can never be 100% sure, and I never guarantee anyone that I can do it until I actually do an assessment of like what we've just done. This was a bit of a obviously a shorter, truncated one. I don't normally talk this much during it though. But if that's you, then obviously the best way to get me is on Instagram, which is Shane Warne _fitness. And if that's the case, and you want to, all I would say is if you jump on, send us a message. All we'll do to start with is just have a quick little chat in the DMs just to see what's going on, see if it's something I think I can help with. If I can, the next step is we just jump on a video call like this and actually go through, do an assessment to confirm it's something I can help with. Until then, I'm confident, but until then, I don't really know for sure. And that's all the process is. If I think I can help, then obviously I come up with a plan and we sort of go from there. But I won't bite unless I meet your PT and your PT's giving you bird dogs, in which case I might bite them. But yeah, there's likely
Sure.
a light at the end of the tunnel, and you don't have to continue living with it. And maybe I can help. And if that's the case, shoot me a message.
Love it, dude. Well, I appreciate your time. Appreciate you, honey, coming on, and appreciate everybody listening. And we'll see you next time. But go connect with Shane. I'll put his contact info down in the description.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.